Ignite. With me today, I've got Paul Thornton, and we're going to be talking about leadership styles. What leadership style to use, or as we've titled the podcast, how to use the appropriate leadership style. Paul, I always ask this up front of all my guests. Please tell people where they can get hold of you.
I am on LinkedIn. I normally publish an article, not an article, but some advice or guidance on leadership there each day. So that's probably the best way to see what I'm all about and what I'm advocating.
Excellent. And you've got a new book out, haven't you, which is called Leadership Styles?
Correct. Yep, I do.
I just looked it up on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And how many books have you written?
I've actually written 20 books. I enjoy writing, and I think it's fun. I look at it as a hobby, but I also use it in my professional career, and so I've done 20. Yep.
20, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm speechless, except though I'm not speechless. So leadership styles. What leadership styles are there? Explain to us what as I'm a leader. What styles can I use?
Well, as you know, there are many different views on how many styles there are. I've seen some people advocate there's 8 styles, 10, 12, 15. I tried to boil it down to 3 basic styles, and those 3 are directing, discussing, and delegating. And I think that you and all leaders use all 3 styles every day. And matter of fact, in the same meeting, you're probably going to use all 3 styles. They're very simple and basic, but like most things that are simple and basic, it's challenging to apply them.
Yes.
But yeah, those are the 3 basic styles. Directing, you tell the person what to do, how to do it, when to have it done by. Discussing, you ask good questions like you're doing today. And delegating is you empower the person to take action and get it done on their own, make decisions, solve problems, get the job done.
Because you talk about in terms of the different styles in your book.
Mm-hmm.
The example that you give in directing is your tennis coach, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my tennis coach directs me. I mean, he tells me what to do or what not to do, or what I need to emphasize, or where my feet need to be, or what I have to do regarding follow through. But he's very precise in exactly explaining what I need to do. Sometimes coaches videotape players and they have the player watch the videotape and they point out exactly what they're doing right and wrong and the changes they need to make.
Well,
There's not a big discussion, it's pretty direct.
yeah.
You got to do
It's not
this,
like there's
this,
a
and this.
discussion about it. Yeah.
Yeah, no discussion, just this is what you got to do. That's one approach.
Yep.
Now, another approach could be you show the person the videotape and you say to them, what do you think you're doing well? What do you think you're doing right? What could you do to improve? So now you're engaging them in critiquing their own performance and coming up with some steps or actions they can take to be more effective. In delegating, I'll just follow through on this. Delegating, I might say to the person, matter of fact, I know a hockey coach who does this. The players have to watch a video of the game, the previous night's game, and the players got to identify one thing they did really well and one thing they need to improve on. So in essence, the coach is delegating to the players to, on their own, self-analyze and come up with, as I say, one thing they did well and one thing they could improve on. So all 3 approaches are appropriate in certain situations. Yeah.
So in directing, you're kind of telling, aren't you? In discussing, you're asking, and in delegating, you're empowering.
Right. Basically, that's the simple abbreviated form. Yeah.
And I think what you talked about, there's also what you talk about in the book is reverse delegating.
Yeah, that doesn't happen that often, but sometimes some employees learn to be very good at giving work back to their boss. They kind of say things like, you're really the expert on this, or you're really better than me, and you'll do a better job, and I really think you should do the task, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, as a manager leader, you don't want to be taking work back that you've properly delegated to someone else. So be mindful of that.
I had a sales guy and an Italian sales guy working for me, and I gave him $1.5 million target, which was the target for pretty much all the salespeople.
Hmm.
And he said to me, he said, I understand that. He said, but I don't really want more than 1 million. So he said, I'm going to give 500,000 of it back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting out of a challenging goal is something people will try to give back to their supervisor or their boss. And, of course, you can't let that happen. You have to hold them accountable and keep the goal set where you want it to be.
So we've got these three styles:
Yep.
directing, discussing, and delegating. When do you think, when's the best time to use them?
Well, if a person has no experience, they've never done the task, they're clueless, they need and want direction, so a directing style would be appropriate. If the person's got some experience and some know-how, you want to have a discussion. What are they thinking about it? What's their thoughts? How do they think they should proceed? Um, Discussing also gets people to think. When you start asking questions, it forces people to think, formulate opinions, come up with their plan. So you're helping them think through the goal, the plan, the approach, what they're going to do. So you'd use it there. If a person is really experienced, they've done the task, 28 times, they know what they're doing, or they can figure it out, you want to use a delegating style. And using each style also helps the people or person learn certain things. When I direct, the person's learning to listen, to ask questions if they don't understand something. They're maybe taking notes on what I'm telling them to do. And they're also learning to meet deadlines, because part of directing is giving a deadline. As I said with discussing, they're learning to think and collaborate and build on the ideas of others and things like that. When I delegate, they're learning to be independent. They're learning to think through issues on their own and get the job done. So each style you use when, depending on the person's experience and skills and knowledge relative to the task that they're doing. And each style also leads to them learning certain things, which is a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, in your book, you talk about you've got this. I love the way you structure it, which is, here is the detail, but then you have the interviews, and there's one
Hmm.
particular interview that you do with a fire
Hmm.
a leader in a fire and
Right.
fireman, yeah, and
Yeah.
and he talks or she talks about how, in certain instances, especially when they're operative in a fire, they're
Hmm.
very that you do this.
Right. Yeah.
And also, but there's other times when outside of the fire, when they will discuss things,
Right.
and he talks about how he actually uses the different styles in different parts, which
Hmm.
is, we quite often we use we used the sports analogy earlier on, and it's a very
Hmm.
common one, but actually thinking about it from a fire
Hmm.
fireman or firewoman's perspective
Yep.
is I like that.
Yeah. I think these three styles have a lot of applicability. As a parent, you use them as a
Yeah.
coach, teacher, leading a fire department. In an emergency situation, you want direction. You're not going to have time to have a meeting and discuss things and, collaborate. you want someone to say, okay, you do this, you do that, we got to do this next, blah, blah, blah. Lay out a plan very quickly, quick decision making, quick assignments, so that's a good example of where directing is very appropriate and needed. But then in other parts of the job, the fireman's job, where he's back at the office, so to speak, and working with his team, he might be having a discussion on different techniques they can use, or lessons learned from the last fire they just put out, or last emergency they just dealt with. What did we do well? What could we improve on? So it's more of a discussion. So it varies.
So explain the three approaches to communication to the three styles.
Well, if I'm directing, it's pretty much one way, right? I'm telling the person, I want them to listen. I want them to ask questions if they don't understand something, but pretty much one way. Discussing, I'm having a two-way conversation. I'm really getting them to comment on what they think the goal should be, the plan should be, the problem is, etc. When I delegate the task, I might direct them and tell them what the task is, or I might discuss what the task with them, what they think the task should be. But how to do it, I'm leaving that up to them. I want them to figure out how to do it. So with delegating, sometimes there's not a lot of discussion. I had a boss that used to say to me things like, just please handle this or take care of this. That was his way of delegating. He wanted me to look into it and figure out what the problem was and solve it, get it done. So that's kind of the different approaches to communicating that you'd use.
You talk in the book about summarizing and testing the transfer as well, don't you? So explain that.
Yeah, when you're directing someone, you're giving them precise instructions of what you want them to do. Now, some people don't listen that well, and they nod their head, and
Or we listen to what we want to listen to.
Oh yeah, selective listening. Yeah. So a technique I use and people can use is test the transfer, which simply means asking the person to summarize or explain the steps they're going to take to get the job done. Make sure they're clear, make sure they've been listening, and make sure they understand the actions and steps they're going to take. So it's a good way to test, were they listening?
Yeah, I think the summarization and the testing, I think, is so important, isn't it? Because I know the first board meeting I had when I set up this company, our chairman basically described about psychological contracts that you have with people, which is when you talk to somebody and you say something, but they hear something different, which is why you always get that situation where in an organization where someone resigns and you say, I don't get this, but people resign and then they say, you said that if I worked hard, you'd make me sales manager. He said, but the leader says, because they have a different definition of what working hard is, well, you didn't work hard.
Yeah.
And so you get this, we have this thing in communication, isn't it, where you say something and I will hear something completely different.
Absolutely. Communication breakdowns they happen all the time. So making sure you're both clear on what the goal is and steps to be taken and deadlines and all that's really important. Yeah.
So what about feedback and the timing of discussions with people?
Well, I think you always want to, make sure the person's open. Is this a good time to give someone feedback? If generally the sooner after an event you give the feedback, the better. It's fresh in the person's mind. But timing is very important. If someone's emotionally upset and really not in a good place, that's probably not a good time to sit down and have a discussion of their performance and what they can do differently and how to improve, et cetera, et cetera. So timing's important. And then when you give feedback, I think you need to be very precise on what they did and what the consequences were. and what they could do, or what changes they could make and improve the consequences. So all of that needs to be factored in. And again, you can use any one of the three styles. You can just tell the person blah, 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 or you can have a discussion. What do they think? Or you can delegate, have them go off and think about their performance and come back to you with their assessment of what they did and what they could do differently to improve.
Yeah, I remember when I was in corporate, there was a culture of, if when it came to the annual review,
Hmm.
it was you were in control of it,
Hmm.
and it was like, so what do you want to do for the next 5 years? Okay, so is there a training need? But it was you that was empowered to do that.
Hmm.
But that was also, if you've got, I don't know, anything like 10, 11 reports, you don't want to be taking that on as an extra thing as a leader, do you? You want to, in effect, delegate that out and get the person to come. They get what they want,
Hmm.
but you don't have to do it.
Yeah, you want them, I mean, it's their career, right? You want them to put some thought and effort into it and come into you with, here's what I think I'd like to do and why. Here's what I think I'm qualified for. Here's where I need to grow some new skills or develop some new skills. Yeah, you want them to be the owner of their career and the longer term career goals that they have, you know?
Yeah.
And I've had people come into my office for a performance review and they're saying to me, well, what do you think I should do in 5 years? And I always throw the question back at them, well, what do you want to do in 5 years? What's your goal?
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
Yeah. So we're talking about these leadership styles, but also talking about goal setting. So how do we, when we're setting goals, how do we use these three leadership styles?
Well, all managers and leaders do set goals, and that's an important part of the job. Again, directing style, I simply tell the person, here are your goals for the next 6 months. Sales manager might say to the salesman or saleswoman, you got to sell XYZ and do this and that. And here they are. No discussion, no big issues around it, just here they are. You could use a discussing approach. What do you see as your goals for the next 6 months? And why? What's your thinking on that? And how are you going to achieve those? And blah, blah, blah. Or
And what do you
delegating.
need? What resources do you need?
Yeah, what resources do you need to make that happen?
Mm.
Or delegating, you say to the person, I want you to take the next 2 days and think about what your goals are going to be, or what you're willing to sign up for goal wise for the next 6 months, and come back to me in 2 days and we'll have a discussion of what you come up with.
Mm.
Here, you want the person on their own to think through and analyze and look at all the factors and the obstacles and positive things that are happening and come up with their goals.
Mm.
So again, different approaches, but coming up with the end result of getting clarity around the goals. And the goals should be specific and measurable and those types of things as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what really to finish this off, conflict. And how do you resolve conflict, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah. Well, conflicts happen, right? They're part of life and part of the business world. And in a conflict situation, if you're the manager or leader, um, you can basically bring the people into your office that are having a conflict, and you can tell them what they need to do. These are the rules, these are what you need to follow. No shouting, no yelling. You need to listen to each other, blah, blah, blah. Or you can bring them in one at a time and have a discussion. What's going on? How do you see it? Bring them in separately, then bring them in together. Or I know of one case where a president had two VPs that were constantly in conflict. And he said to the two VPs, you two are great running your function, but you're not very good working together. you need to go off and figure out what changes are you going to make to be more collaborative and work better together and have fewer conflicts. And if you can't come up with a way to figure it out, you're both fired.
Okay.
So that kind of motivated them to go off and come up with
That's kind
a
of
way to work
delegating.
together, you
It's
know?
kind of delegating with a sort of like a flick of a directing in the tail, isn't it?
It's delegating with a severe consequence if they don't work it out.
Hmm.
So it worked out, and they got along much better, and there were much fewer conflicts, and things were good. So I think the bottom line for me is each style is appropriate in certain situations, and you as leader need to diagnose the situation and determine what's going to be most helpful for the people involved in this situation.
Hmm.
And you got to be flexible and adaptable and adjust, and use all three styles. And there's some issues around each one too. Sometimes we delegate too much to that person who we think's going to do a great job, but we know is going to do a great job. So we over delegate to some people and under delegate to other people.
I'm a massive delegator. Um,
Yeah, well,
Massive
that's a good.
delegator.
That's being a good delegate is a great leadership trait to have. Many people go the other way; they're not very good at it. They want to hold on to everything and be involved in every decision and every issue, and that's not good.
I did a leadership course when I was in corporate.
Hmm.
Very good one. And one of the you're in a group of 20 people, and one of the people, it's the introduction, and you're getting to know each other.
Hmm.
And this person said, I want to move into leadership, but my manager at the moment is terrible delegator. Doesn't pass anything on to me. And
Hmm.
okay, right, fine. And then what happens is, as you go through the course, what happens is that you do tasks, which are usually putting marbles down, but what you've got to do is work as a team and build
Hmm.
things and stuff. And of course, what happens as you go along, there's the first task you can kind of work as a team, but you're individuals.
Hmm.
And then the next task is you actually have to delegate. And this person was given the job of you're the team leader. This is the task you've got to do, and you couldn't do it without delegating. And he
Hmm.
couldn't delegate.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and he actually ended up at the end of it and said, "I've realised it's not my manager that doesn't know how to delegate. It's me."
Yeah. 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 A lot of people I found, I was in corporate training for a number of years, and uh, many people like to blame their boss for just about everything and anything. And I kept going back to, well, you run a group and you can do a lot with your group. You have a lot of influence on your group. So don't keep blaming your boss. Don't be a victim. Take responsibility and make it happen.
Mm.
So you're
I,
right.
I, I totally agree, Paul. You got to in life. You got to take some responsibility for yourself.
Absolutely.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. I've read your book, Leadership Styles. I loved it. Really, really good. And I've just checked; it is on Amazon.
It
And
is.
yes, it is. So remind people where they can find you.
Again, you can find me on LinkedIn. I write comments, quotes, articles quite often there. So that's a good spot. I've written a number of books that are on Amazon, but my latest one is Leadership Styles. And I'm a big believer in these three styles, and I think they will really, really, really help you be a more effective and efficient leader. So check it out.
And as I said, there's loads of you've interviewed a whole bunch of
Hmm.
leaders, sports leaders,
Yep.
grandparents, and
Parents and yep.
and it really brings it alive when
Yep.
you've got those interviews, and
Hmm.
they talk about the experiences. There's one grandparent that says that I use this one style for the 4-year-old, this one
Hmm.
style for the 6-year-old,
Yep.
and this one style for the 12-year-old. So
Yep. Yep. And that grandparent happens to be my wife, who I
right,
get to observe her using different styles with our grandkids. We have 5 grandsons, so lots of opportunities to apply different styles to
I'm
different
sure.
situations. Yeah.
I'm
So,
sure. Paul, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
Thanks, Tim. I greatly appreciate the discussion. And
You're welcome. And
thank
thanks,
you.
Howard, for listening in as well. Edward,
Thank you.
sorry, I'm doing too many things at the same time.
Got to